Well, greetings, everyone, and welcome to a special online event today called Finding Treasure in the Shadow, How to Unearth the Gifts in Your Unconscious. My name is Stephen Dine, and I'm the founder and CEO of the Shift Network. And I really think today's exploration is so important and fascinating and relevant to how do we navigate our times in a really conscious way, because until we deal with whatever's in our shadows, we are compromising our ability to gift the world, to have good relationships, to be a change agent in the world. And the shadow is often seen as something that undermines us, but it only undermines us until we get the lessons and learn the gifts and harvest the gold. And the two featured faculty today are two of really the best in the world at helping us harvest the gold and the treasure in our shadows. Tim Kelley is a longtime Shift faculty member. He's taught thousands how to tap into their own personal guidance. He's a teacher to billionaires, political leaders, and renowned spiritual teachers, and really marries this sort of connection with higher guidance and the deep psychological work with being able to create a purposeful, impactful life in the world as a change agent, as a leader. Beth Scanzani is a highly respected teacher in her own right. She has numerous coaching certifications from True Purpose and Voice Dialogue, and has co-developed and co-taught a number of seminars with True Purpose and the Shift Network. And she synthesizes also a range of psychological, scientific, and spiritual teachings. So warm welcome to you, Tim, and warm welcome to you, Beth.
Thanks, Stephen. Glad to be here.
Yeah. Great. Well, I think we're going to have fun today because the shadow tends to bring out a little bit of mischief, a little bit of fun, as well as some seriousness as well. So it's, I know you two are in for a treat. And I want to let everybody know we're going to have this time with the two of them. We're going to get as much insight as we can. And we're going to have a chance to go much, much deeper in the Shadow Quest, which is a brand new program. It's launching today. We'll share a bit about that towards the end of the hour. So let's start with you, Tim. So shadow work. What drew you to doing such deep work with the shadow? Why was it important in your own quest?
Well, earlier on when I was new to consciousness work, I was sort of a glutton for workshops and would take almost anything. And eventually, after I had done most of the other workshops that were available, that's what was left. I didn't have a lot of resistance to it, but I noticed at the time, this was, more than, I guess this is almost 30 years ago. At that time, it was far less understood and far more popular, and people tended to avoid it, and I didn't really understand why. And I wound up taking, I guess I did at least two-week retreats in the jungle just on shadow work, plus a bunch of other programs as well, and just really came to love it and to see. The experience I had, Stephen, was that there was a whole parallel universe next to the one that I was looking at that I had not been able to see before. It was like someone gave me special glasses I could put on, and now I could see all this other stuff that had previously been invisible. And I thought, wow, how could I have missed all of this? My universe just got bigger, much, much bigger than double in size, much more than double. It stayed with me ever since because I know you know about some of the work I do in the Middle East and places like that. So much conflict that people experience and organization is actually driven by factors that they are not aware of at all. And it's fascinating as someone who understands shadow to watch a conflict playing out and be able to see, here's the aspect of yourself that you're rejecting, and here's the aspect of yourself that you're rejecting, and therefore you have to be in conflict with each other, and you don't have any other choice. My wife and I have commented many times how we actually don't understand how people who haven't done shadow work stay married. It's so fundamental.
Great. Well, Beth, I'd love to get a little bit of perspective from you about why you jumped into this shadow work and what it's meant to you in your own journey of growth and transformation.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. I'm getting the memory back to when I left corporate. So I left corporate about 10 years ago. And at that point, I didn't know what a shadow was in this perspective, or what parts work or any of that was. I was pretty much, busy single mom, corporate executive. And when I had the opportunity, as I said, to leave corporate, I didn't know what the heck I was going to do with myself. I didn't even know who I was at that point outside of corporate. And actually, I discovered Tim pretty quickly after that, and the whole purpose process and the parts work. And I had a really good connection with my dreams. And so I became really fascinated with dreams and the parts that are showing up and the parts of me that I'm discovering in dreams and the parts of me in the world and the parts of me and the aspects of myself that I knew nothing about. And the work, it's just such a beautiful and wonderful life practice. I feel so much more balanced, centered. I have so much more choice about how I act, react, feel in situations. So I really want to teach this work, which I do. I teach parts work and teach shadow work to people, as many as I can. I want to reach as many people as I can with this work. I think it's that important. And it affects not just us individually, but the collective and the planet.
Great. Well, Tim, let's go back to you. And let's, first of all, just have a better understanding of what shadow is, since a lot of times people have a kind of a negative overlay of what that means or think it's all bad. When in actuality, you have a much bigger vision of what shadow means.
Yes. There's that sort of the shadow knows, like that, like it's something dark and evil. It is dark, but it's not necessarily evil. Shadow, you have to think of it sort of in an optics sense, as opposed to a consciousness work sense. That if you shine light on something, then it's easy to see, and if there's no light shining on it, then it's hard to see. And so the shadow or the unconscious is simply the sum of all of those things about ourselves that we cannot see clearly because they're in shadow. There's no light shining on them, so they're not visible. And from estimates that I've heard, something like 10% of the psyche is conscious and 90% of it is unconscious. Now, I think that's a conservative estimate. I think it could be much more than 90%, which means that most of our thoughts, feelings, sensations, decisions, plans, fears, you name it, beliefs, the vast majority of all of those things are happening out of view in the unconscious. If you think about like driving your car or operating a computer, right? If I'm looking at my computer here, I can see the keyboard and the screen, but there's a whole bunch more stuff going on that I can't see at all. Most of how the computer works is sealed up inside a box where I can't see it. Same thing with a car, right? Most people have no idea how most of the car works. They have a vague idea how some of it works. Well, we're actually the exact same way. We're completely blissfully unaware about most of our own functioning, which means that if you don't like stuff that's happening in your life, it's easy to blame the world, but more realistic is to say, well, I actually don't know which part of me thought this was a good idea. And they've done neurological studies, Stephen, where they show that if you make a decision or take an action, the unconscious parts of the brain start firing to cause that decision or that action. This is the more primitive brain, up to half a second before the neocortex does. But if you ask the person, why did you do that? They'll say, oh, I decided to do that because of both. They'll have a rational explanation for why they did it. What they don't realize is the rational explanation got created a half second after the decision was already made. So that means that the neocortex's job, it's not driving. Its job is to come up with a story to explain what their unconscious already decided to do without them having any idea why.
Oh, that's fascinating. The great justifier. It's like, hey, I'm just making up a reason why why my unconscious did something.
Right. Think of it sort of like, White House, communications director, right? Or someone like that. Something happens and now you have to explain why. Right.
Yeah. I've heard that. I've actually heard that referred to as 7 seconds of free won't. That if you can catch those 7 seconds, you can make a different decision.
That's right. That's right.
So if you want to make better decisions, you basically have to go into the unconscious, is what it comes down to.
Exactly. Huh? If you don't like your relationships, if you don't like your job, if you don't like the life you're having, you have to figure out which part of you actually decided to do it that way, even though you consciously may have been trying to do something completely different, because so much of what's going on is unconscious. You're like, late to the game, right? You don't have the power and the influence to make it turn out the way you want.
So since something is unconscious, how do you then start to shift to make it conscious? Because I mean, by definition, unconscious, something you're not seeing about yourself, and therefore it's probably, there's not a lot of light in there.
That's right. And this is something one of my teachers, Carol Kemen, used to say, which is the problem with the unconscious is that it's unconscious, right? So even if you know that that's going on, you still can't see, right, what the hell is going on. And so this gets into so this is why it's so important, right? If you want to change anything about your life or anything about the world, you're absolutely hampered. You're working with a ball and chain around your ankles if you're not dealing with your own unconscious as a means of affecting what's going on in the outside world. So given that, then you have to learn techniques to see that which cannot be seen, right? Therein lies the problem. And the stuff that's in the dark, the unconscious stuff, the psyche naturally resists allowing it to be seen. So there's barriers and guardians whose job it is to keep this stuff invisible, right? Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain, right? Look over here, pay attention to the shiny object. Don't look at that, look at this. And the mind is trained to be distracted away from the unconscious. And so that means we have to have methods, techniques, and that's what we're going to be teaching in this program we'll talk about later. We have to have methods and techniques for identifying unconscious material. Otherwise, we'll just never know it's there. And a good metaphor one of my teachers used is how they found Pluto. The way they found Pluto was they could see its effect on the planets they did know were there. Right? The outer planets would wobble. And they say, okay, well, in order for it to wobble like that, there has to be something else out there that we can't see. And so they watched the wobbles repeatedly and said, okay, well, it's got to be something with a mass about this much, roughly here, and went looking for it. Took them a little while, but they found it. And there was the planet, right where they thought it was going to be, roughly the same size. We now know a lot more after we sent a probe out there. But that was how they found Pluto. So it's a lot like that, right? You can observe the perturbations. Same thing if like you were watching a lake and suddenly a whale went through it. Even if the water is completely opaque, you can see the disturbance on the surface that tells you something's happening underneath. So that's what we're learning to do, is we have to learn to watch the visible signs that something unconscious is going on. Now, there's unconscious stuff going on all the time. But we can't worry about that. We can only worry about the stuff that's leaving enough of a trail that we have a chance to track it down and see what it was. And so an example of that is your reactions to other people, right? Somebody else triggers you, right? Oh my God, I'm triggered. I can't believe she said that. Oh my God. And so people get triggered, right? That triggering is a signal that something unconscious just got touched. Now, the natural thing when you're triggered is to blame the other person and go into fight, flight, or freeze and all that kind of stuff. The brain, and in those situations, the cerebral cortex just shuts down completely, and a very small, primitive part of the brain called the amygdala takes over. But even after the fact, you can go back and say, wow, I was really triggered. I wonder what happened. And there are techniques you can use to trace that back and figure out which unconscious part of you was actually responsible for that triggering. And learn a whole bunch about it, and then go in, like looking for the planet, go and say, okay, I know what I'm looking for. It's something roughly like this, to go in looking for it and find it, make it conscious, right? We want to bring it to the conscious side of the psyche and then integrate it. And the effect of this, Stephen, is fascinating, right? So we're living from this very small section. It's like you're in this huge mansion and you're just living in one house. And so every time you find and integrate a new piece of unconscious material, it's like you just found a new piece of furniture or a new room, right? Or a new appliance or something like that. So you're actually living in more and more and more of the house. So instead of being locked up in one little room, eventually you're in this huge, beautiful mansion that you didn't even know was there because you didn't know where the doors were in the room.
That's fascinating. I love the metaphors as well. It's particularly interesting since Pluto was a god of the underworld too, which makes sense with the unconscious. So it's a great metaphor right there. Beth, so I'd love for you to share it. So we have this, Tim is showing us how it's like you really expand the sense of yourself and you find these hidden distortion points, if you will, or things that tweak you. Let's talk a little bit about some of why there's actually power and gift and treasure in those parts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you want to take that, Beth?
I can start. A little bit of a different metaphor that comes to me is as if we come into the world with this beautiful puzzle, and it makes a beautiful piece of art. me, the world. And but as I go through life, I lose pieces. They're under the chairs, they're in the basement, they're flipped upside down. And so I really don't have a good picture of who I am, of all my pieces. And I only have certain pieces to work with. So as I start to bring back shadow parts, I flip the pieces back over, I find them, I can put them together, and I can see more and more of the beautiful picture of Beth, of the beautiful picture of humanity, all the pieces of humanity. And it's such a different experience. I have a full deck of cards instead of a handful to play with, and I can be and do so much more with all of that.
And often, Stephen, how people think about this is they hear about the process of disowning, and this is a good note to put in here, which is that when we're young, in order to fit in and be acceptable and receive love from our parents and have our friends accept us and those kind of things, we take aspects of ourselves, we take some of the pieces and we flip them over and hide them, and say, okay, I'm not gonna be like that. I'm not gonna do that. I'm not like that anymore, and we get rid of a whole bunch of how we are in order to fit in order to do what we think our parents and our friends and society expects of us. And so we're living from a much narrower version of ourselves. So as you go into shadow and start rediscovering and reintegrating these things you pushed down and set aside years ago, which at the time may have been a great decision, what happens is you find your beauty and your power and your resource, right? So if you're trying to live a magnificent life, if you're trying to change the world and you're only doing it with a very small set of the tools in your toolkit, it's going to be a lot harder. So these other things you've left behind hold the keys. In fact, I love to say to people, the part of you that you most reject holds the keys to the kingdom, right? That's the part you most need to learn to integrate because it has everything that you need that you don't currently have. And so as a result, people who do this work become more powerful, more capable, more self-loving, and more self-accepting, and much better able to deal with other people, to achieve goals, to change the world, to manifest their purpose. A whole bunch of other things now become much easier and simpler because they simply have more tools, resources, capabilities, and power to do it with.
I think you're to just kind of mirror a little bit back there. I think it's a fascinating point that these the parts you most reject hold the keys to the kingdom. And so there's like two parts I'm hearing. It's like one is that there's an expansion of the toolkit. So all these different sides, you're getting them integrated. But then there's also this there's the hidden gifts in a way. It's like the things that you reject. Oh, they actually have a capacity that is complementary or different than what the other things are. So it's not just another tool, but it may balance something else out in you.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's range and access. And one other thing that I have found and people have found is that nature, seeks equilibrium. And so as I reject certain parts of myself, life events and people will come into my life to seek that balance. And it won't feel very good if I'm off balance. But as I start to bring back more of that part to myself, as I start to bring that part back home, I don't have that same frustrating experience of being triggered and having reaction. Instead, I have choice, and I have breadth, and I have range of expression.
Yeah, a great example of this, Stephen. There's a client I had whose parents she was just horrified at how unsupportive of her they were, and how unsupportive of her goals they were. It really bothered her. We did a very important piece of shadow work, and her parents immediately changed their behavior. And it's funny, it looks like magic. She didn't talk to them about it at all. She didn't tell them what she had done. She didn't even ask them to behave differently. They just started to behave differently. And what's important to realize is that people in your life are behaving the way they're behaving in part because you're forcing them to by rejecting certain aspects of yourself. And if you stop rejecting those aspects of yourself, the people around you will start to behave differently.
That's a fascinating insight. It kind of gets at something like family constellation kit therapy. I know that's where you have like these fields that you're creating and people like slot into those roles. You're like the director of the movie and people slot into the roles because that's what your psyche's setting up.
You told them to.
You told them to. That's a
You
fascinating
didn't know you
insight.
told them to, but you did.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the method. So I think you've painted a great picture of like why it's important to go into the deeper shadow. So let's talk about how do you start to do this in a way that's constructive and ultimately integrative.
Right. One thing I want to say that's very important, I meant to say earlier, Stephen, which is very important for the people watching this, is if you've done consciousness work, you've done shadow work. It just wasn't called shadow work. Because the act of making something conscious is the act of moving it from the unconscious to the unconscious. And that is what shadow work is. So, for example, when Beth and I work with people on their higher purpose, they come into a program or start coaching with one of us saying, I don't know my purpose. And then partway through, they go, oh, now I know my purpose. Well, we just moved something from the unconscious to the conscious. Same if we're doing parts work, right? We're now showing them parts they didn't know they had. Or belief work, where you're showing people beliefs that they didn't know that they had and then clearing those beliefs. In all of those cases, we're moving something from the unconscious to the conscious. So people who are nervous and frightened of shadow work, like, oh my God, I don't want to deal with my unconscious. You've been doing that all. If you've done any consciousness work, you've already done that. The thing is that doing it with that as the stated intent is deeper and more powerful and more transformative than doing it by another name. So anyway, all of those techniques are sort of shadow work light, right? A little bit of shadow. But to continue, we talked about reactions before. There's two other methods that we frequently use. One is that, as Beth was starting to say about these, these pieces that are in the unconscious, often there's a relationship, right? There's a polarity between something that I know myself as and something else that I say I'm not, right? So we, in any given trait or behavior or something like that, we accept part of it and say, I'm going to be smart, I'm not going to be dumb, right? I'm going to be attractive, I'm not going to be ugly. I'm going to be quiet, I'm not going to be loud and obnoxious. So we pick in any sort of spectrum of behavior or traits or qualities, we pick one that we like and one that we dislike, and we say, I'm like that and I'm not like that. And so another way to do it is simply to do it through opposites. That is, you can look at all the things you know yourself to be and hypothesize and speculate about what else must be down there. And you don't have to have a reaction to do that. So you can just go looking for the opposites of things. Now, a lot of people will say, well, why would I want to do that? Because the way they've framed the opposite of what they chose themselves to be is they've framed it as something negative. It isn't necessarily something negative, but they've kind of pigeonholed it. They've bigoted, biased, prejudiced against it. They've painted it with a very dark brush to say, this is bad and I don't want to be that. No. They don't know what they're missing, right? It's sort of like, I love vanilla ice cream, I hate chocolate ice cream. Ugh, okay, well, if you've never tried it, maybe you might like it after all. So you go into the unconscious, finding the opposite of it and finding the value of the opposite of the thing that you've always known yourself to be. That's another one. And a third one that's very powerful and very deep, which Beth is particularly skilled at, which is why I wanted her to be in this program with us, is dream work. Sleeping dreams are a very direct access to the unconscious. Would you say a little bit about that, Beth?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, in our dreams come all kinds of things that we're not willing to think about during the day. Dreams have much to tell us. And so in dreams, you often find an opposite or something that you consider bad or scary in the dream, or something that is an other. And that's shadow material, often shadow material. And so in this program, we'll teach how to remember more of your dreams and also how to find shadow aspects and work with those symbols and characters and shadow aspects.
Can you give a good example from your own life of something that showed up as a shadow aspect in a dream that turned out to have a gift for what you're doing in the world?
If you're having trouble, I can actually. Which is this?
Yeah,
I remember this dream very distinctly.
Of course, because you're asking. Yes, but I can't think of one.
Let me do it, Stephen. So this was maybe 15 years ago or so. I had a dream. Now, and some of our listeners may not know, I had a long and illustrious career in the military as a commanding officer. And I had this dream in which I was given a map by this little black Oompa Loompa. And he was a merchant, and he was giving me this map and showing me how valuable the map was. And then in the dream, I was transported to being on the deck of a ship, but it was a merchant ship, not a military ship. And I was the master of the ship. In a military ship, you'd call that a captain. In a merchant ship, you call it the master. And the ship was very smooth and well run. Everybody liked me. We all got along great. And I wasn't giving anybody orders at all. They were all asking me for advice. It was fascinating. There was more to it, but I don't want to get into it in too much detail. But what it was doing was it was showing me a vision for a completely different form of leadership than anything that I had ever known. It was showing me that I didn't have to be superior or have a higher rank or have a uniform or have power in the traditional hierarchical sense in order to be a leader. And that actually opened up a whole new chapter of my life where I learned about collaboration and non-hierarchical techniques, which today I teach. And the next few months, I'm going to be giving several speeches at conferences about this as a result. And I have clients who hire me to teach them in non-hierarchical systems, all coming out of this dream, which at the time I remember thinking about this dream character and thinking, wow, that guy is so not like me, but that would be totally cool. If I could evolve to become him, that's a worthy goal. And it took me like 10 years to do it. It was a high aspiration, and I'm really glad I did. So I get dreams like that every now and then that sort of paint a picture of the next phase of my life and give me specific guidance about what I need to learn and how I need to grow in order to take myself to the next level on my own path.
Yeah.
That's a great story. I love it. Beth, have you come up with anything since?
I did. Yes, yeah. So one that's coming to mind was yoga woman. And so yoga, I had not at that time in my life been, very physically active or never did yoga or anything like that. And in my dream, I was on a bus, and the woman who sat next to me had a long blonde ponytail, and she was all athletic and dressed in her yoga clothes. And she proceeded to tell me all about what it was like when you do yoga and when you become more into your body and the kinds of things, how she felt. And so she was, showing me a vision of becoming more connected to my own body, which I really, really needed, and advice on how to do that and a feeling of what that would feel like. So that's an example. So that was a part of myself I had lost. And
that's great.
She inspired me.
Great. Well, let's explore. I know we have a lot of different things we said we'd cover today. So I want to ask Tim a question about just the whole impulse towards, light and love and being a light worker and all that, like why that can actually undermine us, and how does that relate to shadow work so that we're actually accessing more of our power?
Very good question, Stephen, and a particular pet peeve of mine. And so it's funny because when people say, oh, they hear me talking about my work with purpose and all this kind of stuff, and they say, oh, you're a light worker. And I feel like, not exactly. I'm a light and dark worker.
Maybe there's a little shadow work. Maybe you have to embrace this light worker part, Tim.
Yeah, well, no, I got one of those. It's fine. But there's all this bias towards light good, dark bad, right?
Exactly.
I was actually at a conference last week. This was fascinating. It was a conscious leadership congress. And all these people got together, and these were like academics and consultants and business leaders and very high-powered individuals. And I was fortunate enough to be invited and be in this thing with all these people. And I started to notice certain trends going on in the group, which were not new to me. But at one point they said, oh, go right up on the flip charts or draw or something, your experience so far. So I started making this list, and I started writing all the polarities that I was hearing in the group. So I would write things like, heart good, mind bad, light good, dark bad, inclusive good, exclusive bad, and just all of the different things that people were saying, right? Because they weren't even thinking about it. Well, they're just people just sort of announce their beliefs in the way they speak, and it didn't go there, but we could have gone, progressive good, Republican bad, or who knows what. So this comes out of, in spiral dynamics, what's called the green meme. And this is like, we want to save the world, we want to make the world a better place, and we have the way to do that. We know how to do it. And the people who don't agree with us are at worst evil and at best ignorant, right? So if we could just convince them that we're right and they're wrong, then we could change the world and have heaven on earth. And this is a very common change agent delusion. And what they don't see is that they've actually been sucked into a polarity which causes them to reify and keep reconstructing the current paradigm and not creating a new one. Because all that conflict, all that we're right, you're wrong stuff just keeps the conflict going. It doesn't cause any change, right? This is why in the US, the Congress has basically stalled to a dead halt where it takes months to pass one piece of legislation, right? Because of the polarization, the conflict has gotten so great. And so this idea of the light worker and showing people the right path and all this kind of stuff, on the one hand, it's great, but what winds up happening, and this has to do with that reaction thing that we were talking about earlier, Stephen, which is the process many change agents use to engage in their change agency, is they're looking at the world and they see some feature of it and say, aha, look at that. Women are being beaten, or children aren't being fed properly, or we're hunting whales, right? Or Monsanto is putting out these frankenseeds that are, poisoning the environment or something like that. Now, I'm not saying those things are good, right? But what they do is they have a reaction. They have some powerful, strong sense that this is wrong. Occupy Wall Street's a great example. And now they set out to rally support to get everyone to agree that this particular feature of the world as it currently is evil and must be destroyed. And if we could just all agree on that, then that's step one. We just all have to agree that this is evil and must be destroyed. And then somehow step two is going to be heaven on earth. The connection's not quite clear, but something like that. And so what they're doing is they're actually criticizing what is, not creating a new paradigm. And so I really wish that we could get many, 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 many change agents and messengers to do shadow work so that they could come to see that the impulse driving them to change the world is actually an unresolved aspect of their own unconscious. This was true for me with the book True Purpose, Stephen. That was actually an outgrowth of a mommy wound that happened when I was 4 years old. So, and I felt compulsive about purpose until I discovered that piece of shadow material and integrated it. And now I'm much more relaxed about purpose. I don't know if you've noticed the difference or not.
So I guess what we're pointing out, it's not like the mommy wound was a bad thing. It was more like if we don't recognize it, and still in our unconscious, then it's going to drive us in certain ways that aren't healthy or helpful.
That's right. Aren't helpful for me, and also aren't the shortest path to changing the world. That's the key part. Right? So if you're a change agent and you're coming out against something because it's unacceptable, that is not the shortest path to transforming it. That's actually the long way around. And so as a change agent, the change agents just generally, as I watch them, are being horribly inefficient about how they're going about changing the world by being attached to light, right? And you hear so many different metaphors for this, there's this, and some of them are quite beautiful, like this thing about, I have an eagle and a wolf, and I need to feed the eagle and starve the wolf, right? That right there is a good part, bad part, right? Someone who has not done shadow work created that beautiful little piece of poetry about that I have good parts and bad parts, and I have to feed the good parts and get rid of the bad parts. It takes forever. You can't get there from here, right? What if the eagle and the wolf were working together and trying to get something done? Now we might be able to get somewhere. The problem, Stephen, is that the thing that the person is trying to reject in the state that they're in, right, from their current position in consciousness looking at it, it looks obviously all bad. And of course, anyone else must see it exactly the same way I do and would have to agree that this thing is 100% bad. And therefore, what Tim's saying, I may agree with in a sort of general sense, but not about this. On this point, he's wrong. This thing really is 100% evil. And now we reject the possibility that there's some shadow here I could integrate, and now the world cannot be changed.
Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean you don't necessarily take action if there's some really destructive things going on. It's just that like you're taking the charge away from it and the projection, right? That's
which version of you is going out to change it, and which version of you is likely to be successful.
Nice. Good. Love for Beth to get some of your reflections on this whole principle of polarity and how to shift it from a kind of a destructive or problematic polarity into a more healthy, constructive one.
In my experience of life is that when these unconscious aspects are ready to come up, ready to be reintegrated, they show up. Okay, so they show up in waking life, they show up in the people who show up in my life, they show up in dreams. And so if I try to ignore them or hold them down, it seems that they just get bigger and bigger. In a dream, they may turn into a nightmare. And so to approach that from a place of willingness to consciously work with that aspect of myself, bring it back. Once I've done that, I have choice. I have choice about which aspect I'd like to be in right now, which perspective I'd like to pull in right now. It reminds me of an orchestra. If I have an orchestra and I'm only willing to hear some of the instruments, I can only make a limited kind of music, but pretty soon the tuba that I have, disowned starts to play on its own, and it's interfering with my music, and I don't like it. So maybe I could get to know the tuba and bring it into the orchestra and have it play together with the rest of the instruments. And what a different experience that is.
It's great. It's a great metaphor.
I want to say one more thing about this, Stephen, which is that recently I did a webinar with a woman named Nalima Bhatt, who's a very powerful change agent from India, who's bringing the divine feminine into the corporate world. I just hats off to her for that. And she said something very interesting. She said, one of the big problems in society and in our attempts to transform society is human beings' inability to hold both sides of a polarity. And this really goes to the heart of the matter, right? That as soon as there's a polarity, we want to know which side of the polarity is the good side and which part is the bad side, so that we can claim the good side for ourselves and reject the bad side. I am this, I am not that. It's much harder. The psyche kind of wobbles and skews and tries to do anything it can to avoid having to hold both sides of the polarity. But like Beth is saying, right, if you can't hold both sides of it, you've just cut off half the instruments, right? And as she also said very wisely, they're going to play anyway. They're just not going to play in tune or at the points where you want them to. So the ability, this is the key thing for change agents. The ability to accept and hold both sides of the polarity moves you out of being part of the conflict and part of the problem, and puts you in a position where you can see the whole system and then possibly change it for the better. And the same is true, by the way, we're talking about this in Change the World. The same is true in a marriage, Stephen, or dealing with your unruly kids or your hostile ex-spouse, right? Those are situations where the other person is holding some part of a polarity that you've rejected. And if you could integrate the part of the polarity that they're holding, they would start to behave differently.
Well, I think what you're saying is just absolutely profound truth. And you're on the other side of the polarity of the entire movie making industry of Hollywood, because it's all built on polarity. We're addicted to polarities. And so it takes a lot of deprogramming to really get out of this mindset, doesn't it?
I'll give you a few examples. There's very few films that can actually hold both ends of a polarity, and you wouldn't necessarily figure it's these ones. So the Lego movie.
The Lego movie. There we go. Start them young.
Megamind. And the Matrix trilogy are three examples.
The Matrix. Yeah.
That's right. Those are three examples where they actually consciously set about naming the sides of the polarity and integrating them. It's very, very rare. People got all riled up about like Avatar, for example. Totally polarized film. Good, bad, good, bad, good, bad, good, bad, over and over again. Technology bad, nature good, right? Ethnic good, white male bad. I mean, it's just full of all of these polarities, and the movie consistently takes sides over and over and over again on which side of the polarity is the right one and which side is the wrong one. So
yeah, I think it's good to be aware because that's part of, with the programming we're all taking in. So it's like you start to notice that when you go to the movies, as you just shared. Well, one thing
I love the film. It's very entertaining. Don't get me wrong. It's just from a standpoint of integrating shadow, it's not very helpful.
keep your polarities in the movie theater for entertainment, and when you want to have a good relationship or a good job in the world, and then you start to work with them in a different way.
Right.
Well, in describing today's call, we mentioned we would learn about the 3 most powerful methods of recognizing, integrating your shadow. Now, you covered some of this earlier, but I just want to make sure that you really make it explicit and obvious for folks that the 3 most powerful methods for recognizing, integrating your shadow.
Ones we love, and there are many of these. The ones we love are the identifying a reaction as a tool for picking out something of your own shadow that you've rejected, right? That's one. The other is looking for the opposite of something you know to be true about yourself. And the third one is the one Beth talked about, which is using sleeping dreams, which is incredibly useful because at night, the barrier between the conscious and the unconscious basically goes away temporarily. And you are flooded with material from the unconscious. But you have to capture it and you have to know how to interpret it in order to be able to convert it back into unconscious material that you can actually do something with and integrate. And fortunately, Beth's extremely skilled at that. But that's an unlimited source of material from the unconscious.
Yeah. Beth, you want to build on that and share a little bit more about maybe specifics in how you've worked with that method with clients?
Well, I do want to say, first of all, that for those people who don't remember their sleeping dreams, first of all, we can offer some ideas to help you remember more of them. But second of all, you can also use your waking life, the story of what's going on in your waking life as a sleeping dream. So, not to worry if you can't remember dreams. So, yeah.
Fixable.
Great.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Well, we still have a little bit of time before. I just love anything that we haven't covered yet. I've been responding to a lot of my questions, but some other key points that you wanted to bring forward.
I think that at this point in our society's evolution, right, if you back to spiral dynamics, like if we stay stuck at this green meme level and can't integrate the polarities that are tearing our culture apart, that could be it for us. So to me, it's a pretty high stakes game. Now, I understand that people engage in this work for personal reasons, and they should. But I have a larger perspective, a larger game I'm playing at the same time, Stephen, which is that our inability to integrate shadow and our inability to see ourselves in the things that we're rejecting and the people that we're triggered by, and our inability to reconcile the divides in our culture and in our society are starting to tear us apart. And it could get very, 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 very ugly indeed, and potentially fatal to our species if we can't grow past this point. And it's a maturational phase. It's a maturational phase for individuals when they've done enough consciousness work where this is really the right next thing to do. And it seems to be the case that this is the right next thing for our culture. And I often find myself being the only person in the room who can point out, and they say, well, of course, it's obvious that da-da-da-da-da-da. And I'll say, well, actually, it's not that obvious to me. And to be able to have empathy for a position that's completely opposite from my natural position is something that most people lack. And it's precisely this ability, this training I've had that allows me to do the work with Israelis and Palestinians that I do. And because it's so hard for them, they're so dug in on their own end of the polarity. But I think I would prefer not to be the only person in the room. I wish there were more of us, more of the time.
Yes. And it sounds like part of the pathway for most people to get there is, I mean, Israelis and Palestinians, that's a great and noble effort. And truth is, most of us need to do it in our relationships, in our work life, and just people, everyday people around us. Yeah. Yep. I mean, so speaking of that, Beth, anything commentary just around any special things to take note of in relationships, and particularly intimate relationships, and how shadow work does or doesn't play out?
Well, I think, outside relationships are an inside job, right? So, in addition to being in the relationship, my relationship with my own self, all the parts of myself, is going to affect the way I show up in relationship. So as I bring back more of my lost aspects, as I start to have balance and choice, then I can show up in a relationship, entirely differently. And as Tim says, the other person actually starts to shift as I shift.
Mm-hmm.
Those dynamics
I'll go
shift.
further. Yeah, I'll go further, Stephen, and say that pets, children, and the people you sleep with are very carefully selected to reflect your shadow back to yourself.
Yeah. And I can give an example, a recent example of someone who showed up in my life with, qualities of negativity and criticism and, things that, I would have said before, I am not that. And instead of having a reaction at this point, it was an invitation for me to try on. What is it like to be negative? What is it like to be critical? How about being feisty? What if I'm snarky? And what I found is that bringing those parts back, my expression of who I am and my range of expression of who I can be feels so much more energized. I don't have to be snarky, but I can be, and so it's entirely different.
We consistently throw the baby out with the bathwater over and over and over again. We have to go find all the babies we've thrown out while we were tossing bathwater.
Indeed. We got to keep those babies. And ultimately, it's sort of like, it's like we want to be able to inhabit all these different roles that life is calling for. And if we can't, it's like a good actor has to be able to step into a whole lot of different roles in order to be a great actor. And so we don't want to be typecast the rest of our lives. Well, speaking of which, I think now is a great time to talk explicitly about your upcoming program. And first, this is the first in-depth shadow journey that we have ever offered at Shift, and it's long overdue. And we're super excited about it because it is such foundational work that really marries the psychological work, the personal growth and spiritual work with ultimately how we engage the world. So it connects to your purpose and your career and your passions and your being a change agent and your relationships. It has some of the most dramatic direct effect on those things that any inner work you can do. So the program is called The Shadow Quest: Illuminating and Reclaiming the Gifts of Your Unconscious. You can find all the details at shadowquestcourse.com. Again, that's just as it sounds, shadowquestcourse.com. It's going to be a 5-month in-depth journey featuring both Tim and Beth. So they're co-teaching this because they bring complementary skills and wisdom to this and work different processes. And it really is ultimately a journey of expanding yourself and becoming more clear and whole and conscious in how you engage everything, and both light and shadow. So you've got a greater range of power, a greater range of skills, a fuller palette to paint from, and ultimately you're more at peace with yourself and more at peace with the world. So Tim, I'd love for you to share in your own words first about what it is that people are going to get by taking this journey with the two of you on the Shadow Quest.
Yeah. So as you were saying that, Stephen, I was thinking the word self-love came to mind, because if we're in the act
That's
of
awfully
rejecting...
pushy for an old military guy. Self-love.
Transformation is possible. If you're rejecting half or more of who you are, self-love is not really an option, right? I mean, that's just how it is. So, because we love these parts and we hate those parts, and that's not real self-love. So this is an invitation to self-love. And really what we want to do is teach people more clearly, and we've started that today, what the shadow is and what it isn't, where people get very intimidated because of how they've heard people talk about it, like on Oprah or something, and think that it's something negative, something scary, something dangerous, and don't really grasp the potential that they're giving up on by not doing this work. So that's first and foremost. And then to give people a whole set of tools and techniques to go find these lost aspects of themselves. And in not just lost aspects they never knew were there, right? There's the stuff we disown when we're young, and then these other things we just never knew about. So to find all of this stuff and to learn over time how to integrate it, right? Because it's in the act of integrating it that you get that larger palette, that larger team that you can put on the playing field, that more selves to bring to the table. So, and there's a lot of people in the community who've done some of this work, and very few who've done concerted, serious shadow work. And so we really want to give people that direct dip into the unconscious to see what's there. And it's hard to tell people what to expect because the thing that they can expect is the unexpected, right? It's the thing you couldn't possibly imagine that you could have. That's the greatest gift. The thing you didn't know enough to ask for. You didn't know it was an option. That's what's in the unconscious. So it's hard to say exactly what people will get out of it. But for sure, Stephen, what people can expect is to become more whole, to have a much better grasp of who they truly are, to fall in love with a larger self than they currently know to exist. And very important, shadow work has this effect, and this is part of the core transformation here, it's as if you were taking a veil off your eyes, right? You're looking at everything through a screen and you can't see it all clearly because of everything you've rejected is coloring your sight. And so if you could remove that screen, now you can see all sorts of things that you couldn't see before. And this is part of why people start to behave differently towards you, is you're looking at them and seeing them differently than you ever did before. And now they start to behave differently in response. So it's learning who you truly are, learning to love who you truly are, and then learning to see the world as it is.
Beautiful. Beth, I'd love to share anything else that you really feel like people are going to come away with that you're particularly excited to gift them with. And I should mention, this is a video-based training, and it's very interactive, so it's not going to be just teaching. There's going to be a lot of processes that are engaged as a collective here.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. I would like to add to everything that Tim said by just emphasizing that as I connect with more of the parts of myself, and as I have more self-love, then I also have more compassion and connection with others and with the world and the planet. So that's really, really important to me, that sense of connection to everything and everyone else.
Great.
Yeah.
Great. Well, let's. So I'd love to take a tour of the modules and get a little more detail on what you're, specifics of the journey and the step-by-step. I know this is a very step-by-step sequential process that builds, and you really thought this through in quite a lot of depth. Again, people can see more detail at shadowquestcourse.com. But Tim, if you could just walk through the high level of the arc of the program.
Yeah, so we really thought carefully and consulted with our guidance about how to do this. And part of what we know about teaching shadow work is the course will change as we teach it, right? If it were completely fixed and nailed down, it wouldn't be a shadow course. But as we see the path ahead, the way we start is through this really introduction to and gaining greater understanding of the conscious and the unconscious and the dynamics between the two. There's all this relationship going on between the conscious and the unconscious that we can't see, right? The barrier between the conscious and the unconscious is invisible to most people, and they don't notice things moving down across the barrier or moving up across the barrier. So we want to really make all of that conscious to start with, so that people can get a sense of the map, a sense of what this journey is going to be for them, and to be clear about what it is they want to get out of the journey. What are their personal motives for doing so? And in so doing, we want to demystify the whole thing and make clear, in a certain sense, how incredibly simple this whole journey is, right? It's as if you just had a table with a light on top, and we can see the stuff on top of the table. We can't see the stuff under the table. And now what we're going to do is we're going to go look under the table with a flashlight. It's really that simple. And then from there, in the second module, we want to start to map the terrain of the unconscious to understand there's personal aspects to the unconscious, there's collective aspects to the unconscious, there's what we don't know, and then there's what we don't know we don't know. And so we want to start to get a grasp of where we're going to be going and what the different tools are that we're going to be using. It's sort of like thinking about packing for a journey, if you will, and looking at what is it that we're going to need when we go do this journey, and how are we going to go about it.
So in the third, we'll be helping you remove the obstacles, clearing the path. to finding true self. And so there are some methods that we use that can be used not just for this class, but in moving toward any goal or vision or dream or purpose. And we'll also talk about ways of practicing self-care as you go through the journey.
Because shadow work is really advanced consciousness work and it's very much depth work, we want to help people to set themselves up to be in good shape throughout the program.
One of the benefits of being in a course like this is we have a wonderful coaching staff, and we have a community of people, and you're being given tools and techniques and perspectives and support rather than going off and trying to do it on your own.
Mm-hmm. Very important.
I think the very fact that, the unconscious material is unconscious means it's a lot tougher to do on your own. So if you're called to do this work, you're better off doing it in this kind of a supportive community.
In the next module, which we call Through the Looking Glass, is really about relationship. Initially about relationship to self, because it's important to understand how unconscious material gets generated in childhood. Actually, until children are a few years old, they don't really have an unconscious. It's kind of interesting. So we have to understand how that split first happens and how we make the decisions about which parts to own and which parts to disown, which parts to leave in the light and which parts to relegate to shadow, because that gives us clues about how to go back and find some of these. The next module, which we call Digging for Treasure, this is really going back through the formative childhood experiences and specifically parts work. Now, many of the people in our community have done parts work. For those who haven't, this will be their introduction to it. For those who have, this will be an opportunity to take that parts work deeper, specifically to go looking for certain shadow disowned parts. Parts is not the only kind of shadow material we're going to be working with in this program, but it is actually a very good tool for identifying parts of the psyche that have been relegated to the unconscious since childhood and reintegrating those. Why don't you take us into the dream time?
Dream time. Yes. So as I was saying earlier, there is rich material in your sleeping dreams. And if you don't yet remember your sleeping dreams, we can use your waking dreams. And some of that information is symbolic. Some of it is a matter of looking at opposites. Some of it is looking at what might be considered bad. And there are many, many ways to look at dreams to find unconscious and disowned parts, and then to take the opportunity to bring them back and reintegrate them. So we'll be looking at symbols and dream recall and shadow material.
And there's so much more creativity in this part of the psyche, Stephen. So much so that, like in Waldorf schools, for example, they delay students learning math or learning to read so that the right side of their brain gets a sufficient chance to develop before they kick in all that cognitive functioning. Because in our culture, we start the training of the left brain and the rational side of the psyche so early that people permanently lose touch with their most creative faculties because they haven't spent enough time working with symbol and image.
It's a great point.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then finally, in the last section, it's all about integration and all about how to take this journey forward in community and on your own. And Stephen, this brings up a very important point, which is people who've done shadow work say that every other course they ever take ever again is more shadow work. And that they then go seek and take other shadow work programs, right? Can repeat for credit because once you understand this world, it's all shadow work.
Beautiful. Well, it's a fantastic curriculum, and I encourage everyone who's watching right now to go to shadowquestcourse.com. And when we're complete here, just to give it a read and really tune in. I'll point out a few other things about this program. So first of all, not only is it really rich from a content perspective, and you get also live Q&A time with Tim and Beth. It's all on video. You get recordings of those videos as well as audio. If you want to listen to it at the gym or other places, listen again. You get a 90-minute small group mastermind call every month, roughly. And you also have small group practice times as sort of an after party after the main event with the regular course, where you can dialogue with others and deepen the concepts and share what's going on for you. So you're working at home, you're doing individual exercises, you're also sharing in the online community. You get a library of content for indefinitely. You've got both video and audio. We also do transcripts word for word of every class. So you really, every different way you can learn this material is available for you to really take this transformational leap in your life. So the program starts on March 29th. It's going to run on Thursdays at noon Pacific time. And we also have some great extra bonuses, which you can find when you go to the page at shadowquestcourse.com. We have a live call, special call with Tim on integrating the victim. If there's anything that gets turned into the pariah in New Paradigm Circles, it's the victim. It's like, oh, victim, but victim actually has treasure and gold, and Tim will share why. We also have a live call with Tim and Beth called Polarization and Shadow for Change Agents, building on some of the themes from earlier, where if we want to change the world, we have to do this inner work. So we're not just shadow boxing with our opposites or our shadow in the world. We also have a live call with Tim and Beth on how your client's unconscious is running your practice. Now, this is particularly important for anybody who's a professional in the space, a coach or a therapist or a healer of any kind, and that you're really getting that upfront and really understanding that dynamics. And we also have a 60-minute free coaching session with a trained coach. Tim has built a whole ecosystem of people who are very highly trained in doing this work and want to make that individual process available so you can really get on an individual level, like how to work with some of the toughest points in yourself that you might be, or most unconscious points. So with all of those extra bonuses, really fantastic extra value. And if that's not enough, we also have a special for today only. Actually have two. One is, first of all, you get $100 off in the first couple days here when you sign up by March 13th. So if you sign up right away, you get the $100 off. And if you sign up right away, you will also get a smaller group dream call led by Beth that will be towards the end of the course. It's called Stories from the Night Shift, Discovering Insight and Guidance in Your Sleeping Dreams. So Beth is offering a special bonus when you sign up by midnight tonight. So amazing value. We've kept it really accessible. You can just do 5 payments of $219 over the 5 months, or you can save about 10% when you pay in full, so which is $997. So it's a lot of value, deep transformation, really teaching you how to do this for a lifetime. As Tim mentioned, it's not something that you can only do in the course. It's really like these are skills that you're building so that you can do shadow work as an ongoing part of your life and gain access to all these different parts and energies and capacities that otherwise you're orphaned, and you'll stop having those dysfunctional Thanksgiving dinners as well. So it's a great offering, and really foundational work for all of us who are committed to our growth and evolution and our larger service. And it's a really beautiful offering. So anything about the bonuses that you particularly want to bring forward that we didn't talk about, Tim?
I just want to say how important that one about your clients is for those of you who people pay you money to do consciousness work with them. Learning that it's called transference and countertransference, and learning how that works is actually really, really important in order to have success with your clients. I think that one's particularly important.
This has been an amazing hour. So really lively, interesting, fascinating insights, and a lot of fun. And so I think this is such important work, and it doesn't have to be heavy. It can be very liberating and very fun. I think both of you really embody that. There's this kind of can-do spirit that makes it just opens up new possibilities. So anything that either of you want to say to folks who are still considering joining, or still on the fence about whether to join the Shadow Quest with you? So Tim, you can start.
Sure. Yeah, it's a good way of thinking, Stephen, is having a larger playground, right? We're going to put in a lot more swings and seesaws and jungle gyms in the playground, as opposed to the very small playground that we grow up and learn to play in. So there's a much bigger playground. It's safe to play in. Just have to learn how to see it, right? It's invisible until you know where to look. And I just want to reiterate how excited I am, and I'm delighted that it's finally time to really bring this to the world. So I'm very happy about it.
Yeah, I would ask the question, who could you be, and what could you do, and how would that feel if you had access to many, 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 many more parts of your beautiful self?
Beautiful. Very succinct and poetic way to close. who would you be if you get to access the full spectrum of yourself? So thank you for both of you for gifting us with these insights today, which are so valuable. And thank you for gifting us with this upcoming program. So if you are feeling at all inspired or moved by today's call or curious to go further, I strongly recommend masterful teaching, really masterful processes. This is going to be a true journey of transformation. So you can find out all the details at shadowquestcourse.com. When you sign up right away, you get the $100 off, and you get the special bonus with Beth on the stories from the night shift. So you get all that and all the extra bonuses, all the time with them. And it's a great investment in yourself, in your service, and ultimately your liberation. So thank you both for this beautiful hour together and beautiful offering coming up. Goodbye now.
Thank you, Stephen. Delighted about this.
Thank you so much.